Today, there are just 240 days to go before the general election. That is one of the most important in which any of us are going to have a vote. It's a fundamental choice about the kind of country we want to be, not just for the next few years, but for a generation. This is the moment when we get to shape our own future. Now, ever since the bankers crashed the economy, the big question has been, what would replace it? We found out the hard way that the let the market rip model can't deliver decent living standards, homes and public services. It can't deliver patient capital, productivity or prosperity in which ordinary people share. All it's fit for is piling yet more riches onto a privileged few. Now, economic growth is back, but there's no sign of it in people's pay packets. In fact, we know the gap has got worse. Chief executives of the biggest companies now earn 175 times the wages of the average worker. So come the election, we all face a choice. Are we going to settle for a nastier and poorer Britain, a Downton Abbey-style society in which the living standards of the vast majority are sacrificed to pay for the high living of the well-to-do, where the blame is heaped on the most vulnerable, migrants, claimants, while the powerful and privileged sit pretty? Or are we going to seize the opportunity and build a new and fair economy that provides the people of this country with good, skilled jobs, a civilised society that provides decent welfare, nurseries, adult social care that families need, and a true democracy in which we all enjoy fundamental rights and freedoms and where we have a real say over how our lives are run? Now the economy is recovering. Any reasonable person would think that this is the time that a government would help repair household budgets and share the proceeds of growth more fairly. But the jobs that are being created too often are low-paid and insecure. And while there's nothing wrong with being genuinely self-employed, working on the lump for half the pay is no foundation for a strong economy. This is a government that appears intensely relaxed about young people stuck in unpaid internships, dead-end jobs, wasting their talents and education. And George Osborne has been clear. He has absolutely no intention of relieving the pressure on public services. In fact, we've already seen severe cuts, but we quite literally haven't yet seen the half of it, with £12 billion worth of cuts still to come under this government. The NHS is already buckling under the strain despite the so-called ring fence. And what's worse, as I have to say, those absolutely brilliant mums from Darlington showed when they were on the march. What's worse is that privatisation is corrupting the core principles of public service and wasting billions. And then, of course, there's welfare. Now, of course, people get fed up when they read in the papers, or some of them, about the tiny minority who cheat the system, just like they resent corporations who cheat on tax. But there is still strong support for a decent welfare system in this country. And ministers are getting found out, just as we saw with the bedroom tax, the nastiest, most regressive and downright cruel policy since the poll tax. Delegates, the truth is that welfare cuts, 3/4 of them, are hitting people who are in work, Working parents who already dread opening every gas and electricity bill when it comes through the letterbox, they're now losing £1,000 or more in child benefit and tax credit cuts. Think about all those children who didn't even get a trip to the seaside this year. No chillaxing in Cornwall like the Prime Minister for them. It's time that the government came clean. They are deliberately hacking away at our welfare safety net. And nothing demonstrates that better than the 5-week benefit wait under universal credit. No matter how long you've worked, no matter how much you've paid in, if you lose your job, you will have to wait 5 weeks before you even see a penny. It's welfare for Wonga, a policy guaranteed to line the pockets of loan sharks. And by the way, I've got to mention this because what was the advice of the Employment Minister, Esther McVey, to the young unemployed? Did you see what she said? She said, they've got to be realistic. They could get a job in Costa, or they could go and work in Dubai. I mean, delegates, I think I've heard it all. I remember when we were told to get on our bikes, but being told to get a ticket on an EasyJet to the Middle East is something else entirely. This brand of conservatism is the enemy of aspiration, because as inequality soars, social mobility has hit reverse. Silver spoons, ever more firmly clamped in the mouths of those who were born with them, whether it's the judiciary, the media, business, or public life, wearing the old school tie means you are more than 10 times likely to reach the top. And under this government, class prejudice is becoming respectable once again. Think about mixed housing, apartment blocks, forcing social housing tenants to use a separate entrance, the so-called poor door, the shame. According to the Family and Childcare Trust, private nurseries are refusing to offer publicly subsidised places to children from the wrong side of the tracks because wealthy parents don't want their children to mix. And while youth unemployment is still too high, the government may boast that record numbers of young people are entering university. But what they don't tell you is that it's Brideshead revisited for the few, but decades of debt for the rest. Think too about that basic principle of democracy, any democracy, equality before the law. Now, if a burglar robbed a house, even if that house was a mansion, the victim wouldn't be expected to pay up front for the privilege of seeing him in court. So if a boss robs a worker of holiday pay, why on earth should that worker have to find more than £1,000 to seek justice in an employment tribunal? It is just plain wrong that workers are being priced out of justice. So delegates, let's demand it. We want those employment tribunal fees scrapped once and for all. But the truth is, we are witnessing a regeneration of the class society in new forms for sure, with financiers increasingly dominating the wealthy elite and a growing number of young graduates finding themselves stuck in the ranks of the low-paid. But a class system nonetheless that bears down on working people's voice and aspirations. The new Conservative Party is a case in point. You may remember this summer, the Prime Minister had to abandon plans to rebrand his party as one of opportunity, when after searching high and low for MPs of humble origin, he could only find 14. And then, of course, there was that difference of opinion with Baroness Varzi. She resigned in protest at the Prime Minister's policy on Gaza, a humanitarian crisis that we'll be debating later this week. But she said something else of interest. She accused the Conservatives of having a problem, and I quote, with brown working-class women from the north. In my opinion, that's a little unfair. They don't much like working-class people from the south either. But it is the sheer snobbery which Baroness Varzi rightly complained of that in part explains why the Conservative Party has made such a fetish out of attacking the only institutions in this country that was set up to be run by and for working people, trade unions. That and fear. Because while it may not always feel like it, be in no doubt, they are afraid of us. Afraid that while most of us don't care, we don't care what background you're from, we take people as we find them. But we do not accept that a public school education makes some people our betters. Afraid that we see through government spin, that we point out when the emperor is wearing no clothes, and that we have intelligent, credible policy alternatives based on our values of equality and democracy. And above all, delegates, they are afraid that we can mount formidable opposition to the damaging market free-for-all policies that they want to see. That's why we must make Britain Needs a Pay Rise, that demonstration on October the 18th, a brilliant, peaceful, massive show of our strength. All the more so because now we know that unions are firmly in their firing line. Now, only authoritarian regimes attack union rights, but that is precisely what the Conservative Party has promised to do. After all, how else to defend an undeserving elite than by demonising democratic dissent? The Conservative Party's proposals on industrial action are draconian. They set an arbitrary ballot threshold that no other democratic election in Britain is required to meet. Make no mistake, delegates, they intend to ban strikes by the back door. And new rules about ballots will give employers new ways to use courts. We've already got very tough public order laws in the UK, but now we face new criminal charges and offences for industrial disputes. That will give authorities licence to snoop on trade unionists using all the technology and surveillance techniques which Edward Snowden warned of. This flies in the face of the fundamental values that I believe the people of this country hold, values of fairness and freedom. These proposals represent a threat not just to working people and their unions, but to everybody who cares about civil liberties and democracy. And let me promise you this, delegates, the TUC will fight them every step of the way. Altogether, this adds up to perhaps the most radical right-wing programme put at an election for a generation. It would make us even more unequal, where trade agreements like TTIP are giving multinational corporations free rein to rip our precious public services apart. A country where not just the lowest paid, but where the great working majority struggle to make ends meet, where millions more are trapped in casual work, never knowing what they're going to earn each week, and where workers' rights and liberties are trampled on. And worst of all, a country that just like a dictatorship, stops its unions from doing anything about it. So that if there is one message from this Congress, it is this for sure. We all know it. The next election matters. We have to decide who will measure up to the aspirations of working people as set out in our campaign plan, unanimously endorsed by this Congress. Who do we most trust to really deliver a real industrial policy so that we rebuild manufacturing, reform the banks, cut carbon, and end the North-South divide? Ask yourself, who respects the need, not just for a higher minimum wage or even a living wage, but collective bargaining so that we can deliver a fair wage? Who will give us fair taxes and tackle boardroom greed? Who will listen to our case for workers to have a voice, not only on top pay committees, but just like most of Europe, up to and including company boards? Who will promise to build 1 million new homes? Who values welfare? Who really cares about the old, the sick, the disabled? Who is really going to get tough on 0 hours and agency abuses? And who will give our children a brighter future with genuine apprenticeships and a youth jobs guarantee? The choice is clear. If you value our NHS, if you value our public services, value a decent standard of living, value the right of the many to band together against the power of a mighty few, it's time for us to stand up and be counted. Now, this is the biggest battle in my lifetime, and we know that they won't give up power without a fight. We know that it won't be a clean fight, but let me tell you this. I believe that everybody in this hall is determined. I believe that justice is on our side. I believe that working people will win. And so together, I want us delegates to send out a message from a hall. Let's tell them loud and clear, we're ready for you. Bring it on. Thank you.